Pennsylvania Downtown Center. We are a nonprofit based out of Harrisburg, and I specifically work on the WalkWorks program, which is a collaboration between the State Department of Health and let's see, I'm actually trying to share my screen. I'm not doing that well.
Oh,
Trying to multitask. Okay. Think there we go. There we go. So as I was saying, we're a statewide nonprofit, and Pennsylvania Downtown Center itself focuses on community revitalization. We work with municipalities around the state on economic development, physical plant organization. We support Main Street and Elm Street community organizations all over. I'm specifically working on the WalkWorks program, which is a collaboration between the State Department of Health and the Downtown Center. You may have, since Allegheny County is home to University of Pittsburgh, you may be familiar with the origins of the program, which actually started as a collaboration with the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health. But it has shifted over time to focus more on a planning rather than just program and healthy behaviors focus. And so that's where the shift went from University of Pittsburgh to the Pennsylvania Downtown Center. So I'm going to talk about really where we're coming from. And I think you'll probably see that it's sort of a combination of fields that was maybe not really within the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health wheelhouse, but is definitely in the Downtown Center's area. So we're basically working on promoting active transportation in order to improve public health around the state. So what is active transportation? As defined in the state active transportation plan, have the definition here. It talks about being self-propelled and human-powered mode of transportation, and it usually refers primarily to walking and biking. I would note, however, that that may not be, it's often sort of shorthanded as walking and biking and or using a wheelchair, but there are many other dimensions to it. And this graphic starts to get at how some of the ways it's being teased apart. In particular, e-scooters have complicated the question, because riding an e-scooter, while it does require more proprioception and vestibular skills, balance and a general level of fitness, it's not the same level of exertion as even walking would be. So there are people trying to analyze what constitutes active transportation. And in general, it's agreed that it's low speed and low powered, even though there may be either pedal assist or motors as in electric wheelchairs or hoverboards or things like that. Another way of thinking about it is, it's anything where you're exposed to the elements. But even that doesn't really hold, because not on this almost comprehensive graphic are microcars, which are basically a chassis that goes around a wheelchair. Which in Europe is now seen actually often being used on biking infrastructure. It's actually small enough, and its speed is low enough, its weight is low enough for it to work in those settings. So all of this is to say that active transportation is a lot of things, often shortcut to say walking, biking, and using a wheelchair. So who's involved in active transportation? This is a particular graphic from the Surgeon General that tries to talk about all these different entities having a say or a role. Now, they do say in the graphic, everyone can help make our communities more walkable. I would actually argue that it probably ought to say everyone can help make our communities more active, but that there's a subset of people that can really help make those communities more walkable. In other words, make it possible to be more active. And that subset really focuses on transportation and land use, professionals, community designers, people who are doing planning, engineers, architects, basically, sort of the the physical infrastructure component of society. And then everyone else listed here, whether it's Parks and Rec people, businesses, media, schools, individuals, and then healthcare, community organizations, and public health, they can support. And in fact, public health, I think, has a huge role to play in education. So that's where I think Live Well Allegheny does come in, thinking about ways where even if you are not yourself directly involved in design, planning, or infrastructure, I may be able to point out ways, we may be able to point out ways that you can become involved in those things, avenues for you to provide a voice for public health in planning and infrastructure design going forward in your communities. And why would you want to do that? There's a lot at stake. We have entire presentations just about the benefits of active transportation, and they are really extensive. It's actually kind of comical, you know, um, it's like this and this and this. It really becomes more a matter of, it's almost like, why wouldn't you do it? Why wouldn't you promote this? There's so many dimensions of positive dimensions to be seen from promoting active transportation. But there are also barriers. So, and I'm going to talk about some of those. But let's think more about, what we get out of active transportation. So these are some graphics from CDC about physical activity. Active transportation at its heart really is physical activity. Even if you're riding that scooter, you probably walk to it and from it. You're just having a little bit more incidental physical activity in the course of your day, which is really valuable. If we zoom in on one aspect of this flyer, it talks about how physical activity is more effective than any drugs on the market. Now, it is possible that, some of the new obesity drugs are giving it a run for the money, but also at what cost? I think this crowd probably understands a little bit about the order of magnitude of expense for those things. Admittedly, infrastructure is also expensive, but those are things that's money we're already spending. And so can we spend it in ways that will be more effective? We definitely know that we need it. So here in Pennsylvania, just looking at leading cause of death being heart disease among both men and women. Heart disease is one of many things that are where physical activity can have an impact on whether it comes about and whether it gets you in the end. Other places where, Pennsylvania shows a need. This is, I like to say, the world's most boring graph. I guess what it shows us is that we're not making a whole lot of progress. And we have a lot of need. We have, fairly static levels of obesity and overweight in the state. So definitely room for improving our physical activity. We know that the health benefits of physical activity don't stop there either. It's not just combating overweight and obesity and heart disease. In fact, I feel like one of those Ginsu knives commercials, but wait, there's more. You can really start to see other impacts on everything from mental health, clinical depression even can be impacted by increased physical activity. Definitely improvements in symptoms related to diabetes, dementia, and Alzheimer's can also respond as well. Even one of these graphics is talking about impacts on some cancers. So CDC knows all of this, the Centers for Disease Control, of course, and they put out these guidelines recommending levels of physical activity for the public. And clearly based on our obesity and overweight graphs, we can tell that simply telling people that they should get more physical activity isn't necessarily working. So why is that? On the one hand, telling people they should get more physical activity and hoping that they will do it by walking or biking just to get where they need to go is fraught. In part, there are very real increases in risk on our roads, especially for pedestrians. In fact, this graphic is only through 2019, and the numbers are actually getting worse, not better. So the increase in fatalities over the 10 years from 2010 to 2019 shown was 46%, like a massive growth in pedestrian deaths on the road. Meanwhile, all other traffic deaths increased, but by a much lower number. So why is that in turn? Why are roads more dangerous? There are a lot of reasons for that, and there's a lot of graphics to try to explain it. One of the really basic ones is thinking about how speed and safety are connected. So this is a version of this graphic tying together different speeds that a motor vehicle might be moving at. So you see that across the middle, 20 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour, 40 miles per hour. And then at each level, some related stats. So across the top, we see the percentage of pedestrians who, if hit by a vehicle at this speed, would die. So in this case, 18%, almost 2 out of 10 pedestrians would die when hit by a vehicle going 20 miles per hour. And by contrast, at 40 miles, if the vehicle is going 40 miles per hour, almost the converse of that, right? Like almost 8 out of 10 people would die. And at 30 miles per hour, half of the people would die. Now, you'll see different versions of this graphic. In fact, I'm going to show you a different version right now. And we'll talk about sort of what they're trying to convey in a little bit more detail. There's also something shown down here, which is talking about the cone of vision. And I think maybe we'll be able to see it a little bit easier on the next graphic. So this one is actually, the last one had been from Lancaster City. This one is from City of Seattle. And so they're talking here, again, trying to combine all of these pieces of information, the speeds, who's going to survive, and then also information about whether drivers will yield at these different speeds and more about the cone of vision. I do think this cone of vision graphic, it's not quite as nice because it's literally circular, and looking through a windshield is a little bit more oval, but it's a little bit easier to see what you aren't seeing here. So what they're pointing out is that for a driver of a vehicle who's going 15 miles per hour, they actually have a fairly capacious sense of the street ahead of them. They can take in information about people on the sidewalks, what's happening in the road, the fronts of the buildings. By contrast, once you're going 30 to 40 miles per hour, your cone of vision narrows down. This is a physiological response. Your brain can only process so much information at a time. And so you screen out what you are perceive as extraneous information. At that speed, you really need to know what's happening directly in front of you. And so while there still may be people along the sidewalks and building fronts and other things happening, you were just looking, concentrating on your business, do it dead ahead. This also means that, if as you're going along at 15 miles an hour, one of these people approaches the street and enters the street, maybe at a crosswalk, you would most likely have a sense of that happening. You would see them. By contrast, over here, if you're going that fast, that same person stepping into a crosswalk would be, quote, coming out of nowhere. They're literally in the same place, but your brain can't process them. So you've consigned them to nowhere. And we see this play out on a regular basis, and yet we aren't necessarily aware of it. So what is the consequence of that? It's literally says up here, going slowly, you're more likely to yield because you can see, like a driver is more likely to yield because they can literally see the pedestrians. Going faster, they're less likely to yield, so they yield less often. And when they end up crashing, which can happen with less yielding and more complex settings where there may be people crossing in various places. So they're less likely to yield, and when they do crash into a pedestrian, they're more likely to kill them. So these are layered problems. Just looking again at those cones of vision, these also has other implications for the places we live and occupy. I try to point out also to community development, community economic development people, people driving through your community at those higher speeds also do not see your businesses. They do not see your signs. This is why billboards are huge, right? But it's also why many of our small towns or neighborhoods are struggling with what kind of signage their businesses need in order to catch the attention of people passing by. If you go to a town in somewhere that is much more walkable, you won't see those signs because at a walking speed, you actually can see what's going on. You know that the store is there. You don't need a big flashing open sign or neon. Now, these graphs are variable. Sometimes you'll see them with different numbers attached to them. So I've just thrown this in here for a little bit of background. This is where they're looking at what speed results in what percentage of fatality. And so in this graph, it's for all pedestrians. And so you can see this is where actually it's a little bit of a higher number. They're getting 10% dying at 30 miles per hour, at about 50% dying at 40 miles an hour, but it's only at 50 miles an hour that you get to 9 out of 10 dying. That's for all fatalities. So the graphic we were looking at is more for someone who's elderly, where you get, at 20 miles per hour, you can get an increased risk. At 30 miles an hour, you're getting about 50, and at 40 miles an hour, you're getting much nearer to 100. And then similarly, there are graphs for the very young. So we have variations in when we are assessing these things in who is getting hit. And then we also have variations in the vehicles. I think we're all aware of this. Vehicles are literally changing their shape over time. And so the size, the weight, and the configuration of vehicles also has an impact. You don't have to be a small 4-year-old to bring this home. Even an adult human who isn't particularly tall would also be basically invisible in front of this vehicle. So we're looking at visibility issues. We're looking at higher front ends, hoods that are very, very high. And those also result in worse outcomes than the graphics we were just looking at for speed and fatality for pedestrians. So we know that the roads themselves can be dangerous. Plus, they actually often don't go where we need them to go, at least for people walking, biking, or using wheelchairs. This is really unfortunate. This is just a plan view of a community in Pennsylvania looking at sort of connected networks in blue and how they're sort of isolated one from another. And, these yellow areas are needed connections in order to make it possible for people to get to destinations. This is not something the rest of our transportation network has to worry about. There are places where roads end, but they aren't generally where then people have to get out and push their car. Our roads end at endpoints in forests or in driveways and things like that. But otherwise, generally speaking, starting from one point, getting to where you need to go, you can do it, or you have options. Even with the catastrophic failure of and the collapse of the highway in Philadelphia this week, we have this complex network that gives people other options for getting where they need to go by vehicle. I will say they're also promoting parking, expanding transit numbers of cars and things like that. So in Philadelphia right now. So I think those are actually good moves, giving people a multitude of options. So we know that physical activity is easier said than done. This is an example of people right near where I live in the center of the state. Clearly, on the one hand, you see them on the left, pushing a wheelchair along a 5-lane road. You look on the right, it gets worse. It's a 5-lane road, there is no shoulder, and they're going into semi-traffic. This is not something you do if you have other options. So this is where we're starting to look at how the physical determinants of health, a component of the social determinants of health, are really having a large say in our health outcomes, both in this sort of acute point way of being exposed to risk of fatality or serious injury from crashes, and also in a chronic way, in that we don't have enough opportunities for physical activity that will lead to a healthy and high quality of life. So the CDC is really getting into this. Over the past 10 to 15 years, the CDC has started to promote what they call activity-friendly routes to everyday destinations, which is basically functional active transportation, trying to get more incidental, just physical activity into people's days. We'll even see graphics that look like this from the CDC. This is, it doesn't quite look like architects did it, but looking at cities, looking at sort of the fabric of cities, not just at individual level behaviors or surroundings, but really thinking about how these things work together and looking at how we can consider combinations of crosswalks, destinations like schools, destinations like offices, parks, residences, stores, and what we can do to make those safer and more accessible. Do we need protected medians down the center of the lanes? Do we need to allow for and provide transit? Are we really thinking about the size and the provision of sidewalks and the condition of sidewalks throughout our communities? So they're really moving into this space, really talking about physical infrastructure and the need for health professionals and public health people to be thinking about it. It's one component of the entire Active People, Healthy Nation initiative. And it's taking time. It's sort of playing out over time. We're also seeing changes within the transportation field, though I would say it's a gradual process in the same way that the public health people are sort of learning a new language and learning how to speak in terms of physical environments and the language of infrastructure, like what are the parts of a street and how do we make a given street safer. Similarly, the people who have been working on building streets for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, they have been doing it a certain way, and we're starting to get where we're saying we're getting through that the way we've been doing it maybe hasn't been working for everyone. So we have some graphics here from Smart Growth America in collaboration with Transportation for America and the National Coalition for Complete Streets. Complete Streets being a street in which everyone, no matter what mode they're using, is safe and feels safe for all users. So this is just an example. Historically, if you had a road through your community where people were driving too fast and it was dangerous, the old process would be to prioritize that speed and actually assess how many people were driving. If they were driving at a certain speed that was higher than the speed limit, you would actually, this is still happening, they would just raise the speed limit, like officially, just say, well, oh, I guess everyone's driving that fast. We'll just make that the new speed limit. And then you would limit other people who weren't in vehicles access. So say that people walking or biking are not allowed there for safety. They can't cross, they can't go along it. Basically, you're giving the road over to vehicles. And the result is the road might be safer in some ways for drivers, and particularly they're safer from hitting people, but it's actually more dangerous for others because the people who still may not have access to a vehicle or still need to get where they're trying to go, like from a bus stop to a grocery store, it's actually more dangerous for them. So the new process is to prioritize safety. And that actually means understanding there's a trade-off between speed and safety, like we were talking about before. Interestingly, we're also finding that if we slow cars down, it doesn't actually mean it takes you longer to get where you're going. It just means you're less dangerous in the process, because we do a lot of speeding up and slowing down as we drive, and just sort of making our traffic movements and our streets just sort of more even actually is safer and more efficient. Who knew? So this new process, we prioritize safety. We recognize that the high speeds are dangerous. We recognize that everyone has a right and a need to use the roads. And then we make the driver's role in that safety clear. So we're giving drivers lots of cues. clearly marked crosswalks, changing the width of lanes, sort of making the street feel narrower, which uh, tends to prompt people to drive a little bit more cautiously, changing the geometry at intersections. So one of the things you're seeing here is this, what's called a slip lane, where a person can just continue driving almost at speed around a corner, is being shown filled in here. So they have to drive up to the corner, see pedestrians if they're in the offing, and going around the corner, they're going to do that much more slowly. There's a lot of other sort of detailed changes that are shown here, but the the end result and the end strategy is just sort of a new way of thinking, like I was saying. So that new way of thinking it actually does, it is a challenge, right? We are saying that, we want things to work differently, but in a way we want them to work the way they were supposed to work all along. So we have, in many cases, either neighborhoods or small communities that might look like this on the left. And when we start talking about making transportation improvements and making places more walkable, there's often a fear that, oh, you're trying to make this into Times Square, you're trying to make this into the big city. Meanwhile, while people are focused on that, what they see is this threat of being turned into Times Square, what's actually happening is our small towns are turning into this. Where our economic development is happening outside of the towns with huge parking lots, which themselves are dangerous for children and the elderly, with all these vehicles with poor visibility backing up, and uh, it, it's kind of a nightmare as well. So that actual risk is happening, and these settings that we're turning our towns into also require driving between the small town center and these new places, and often don't provide options for other ways for people to get to those places if they don't have access to a car. So that brings us to, so we're sort of focused on this. We realize there's some kind of danger, but we wind up, in many cases, our society sort of focuses on this chimera. It's not really this danger of being turned into New York City. It's actually a much more imminent danger of both risk of crash and the growing rise in chronic disease and overweight, obesity, et cetera, diabetes. So who is active transportation for? There is this image in our heads of what's actually been dubbed the mammal, MAMIL, the middle-aged male in Lycra. And so that's, the picture of the weekend warrior, someone riding a bike really fast, kitted out, maybe riding, 50 to 100 miles on a day. That's a very specific image. And what we're trying to get across is that's not really what this is about. This isn't like, quote, cycling infrastructure. This is about transportation, just many options for many different people, many times of day, many times of the week, just in the course of their daily lives. So we really want it to be for people of all ages, of all walks of life, all income levels, all abilities, and really comprehensive, not just focused on having a recreational trail or a destination, tourism trail, place where we're going to attract travelers and tourists and do economic development, but really have it be about just keeping people active, giving people options. Arguably, as well, we should expand this because honestly, active travel is also for people who drive. People who drive ultimately must get out of their car at some point. And so there's going to be some form of active travel for them. The other thing we find is that places that do the best job of accommodating people driving, accommodating people walking and biking, are also the best places to drive. So honestly, that's where we start to see that this is not just a niche interest. There are other aspects to this as well. So we've started to analyze in recent years who's out there who does or could bike. And so we have that sort of small niche group of the really highly confident people like wearing all the Lycra. We have the somewhat confident. I'm in this category. I'll ride most everywhere, but I'm usually just sort of looking like a normal person. Like I'm not kitted out. And then we have a lot of people who are interested but concerned. They would like to ride, but they're not comfortable with what's available in terms of infrastructure, and who can blame them? The infrastructure is somewhat lacking. So people in this category might be parents with children in tow. It might be people who are new to riding a bike. It might be people who are just new to the place that they're in. So I've taken this graphic just to add a little bit to it and make it a little bit more understandable mathematically, because it's a nice picture, 4 to 7%, 5 to 9, 51 to 56. What does that mean? So for one, I added the unspoken chunk, which is the people who say they are not going to ride a bike at all. No way, no how. And that's an appreciable chunk, say 34%. And then this bar across the top is actually proportional. So rather than these sort of wider things, so that little niche is a small sliver of the population. Then there's the somewhat confident, again, still small. Once you add the people who are interested but concerned, you actually realize that you have a very substantial segment of the population that's interested in this. Is it 100%? No. Interestingly, however, neither is driving. So we're also starting to look at who driving is for. And when you actually subtract the people who are too young to drive, kids up to 16, those who are too old to drive, those who have disabilities that do not allow them to drive, which is actually the majority of people with disabilities. Typically 60% of people with disabilities who are adult potential driving age are unable to drive. People who cannot afford a car, people who cannot get a license or do not have a license, have lost a license, you actually find that the proportion of people who cannot drive, depending on where you are, is typically somewhere between 25 and 40% of the population, which is actually comparable to this number of people who say they would never ride a bike. Also, interestingly, once you actually build the infrastructure, there are a lot of people from this no way, no how group that somehow find themselves onto the infrastructure. Like it becomes, once it is less forbidding, it becomes possible for many. I like to say that this particular graphic is actually about cars. So the idea being that, related to what we were just describing, right now we have a system that gives everyone a car or assumes everyone has a car. So across the top, everyone, we all have access to the same transportation system, which may not work at all for some people, may not be quite the right size for some, work well for some, and again, be sort of a stretch for others. And what we really want are options. Make sure that everyone has access to mobility that is suitable for their needs. And in fact, it might be that this person right now is riding that bike that fits them, and sometimes they drive, and sometimes they walk, and sometimes they take transit. There's not just one size fits all. Ultimately, what we want to be doing is making a difference in people's lives. So across the top are pictures from across Pennsylvania of things that really happen, bus stops that you have to teleport to. If you're in a wheelchair, there's just simply no way to get there. We have examples of, this is the access to a small town. You have to cross a big highway, and just even to get to the intersection, you have to climb across curbs and through cars. Or we'll find ourselves in our towns and we'll have curbs that are only 6 inches high, but might as well be 6 feet high for people using a wheelchair or even pushing a stroller or other kinds of rolling devices. And what we really want are options, as shown across the bottom, where we're just accommodating multiple modes. We have ample crosswalks. Our bridges allow for people not just in cars. We have crosswalks, different modes. This is a cross bike, where a bike lane is crossing the intersection. And we might even have cycle tracks shown over here. And again, it's not just to have these things, it's because all of this gives more equity, more accessibility, more functionality, more options for people, and ultimately improves public health. So WalkWorks is trying to help people do all of this. We promote active transportation, shown here. We provide technical assistance to communities, and we administer mini grants for the development of active transportation plans. We have to date worked around the state. This is actually a retrospective map, so where we were focused and where we have done first plans, and then all these little red dots I just added are every place that has done previously a walk work route, establishing a 1.5 to 2 mile route in their community with signage that groups can use to encourage physical activity. Our current uh, plan projects are shown with the big red dots here. So we've been working across the state for about 10 years. We're in our 7th year of doing active transportation plans. These are all the communities we've been doing planning work with. For the most part, plans. With some of them, we've also done what are called complete streets policies. So our current focus areas have been updated a little bit. And so we are currently looking, these blue counties are what are called state physical activity and nutrition target counties. And then these mustard colored areas, including quite a lot of them in Allegheny County, are the Department of Environmental Protection, Environmental Justice areas. So anyone in those areas are our top priority. That doesn't mean we won't talk to people outside of those areas. We certainly will. Some of our funding will be available to anyone, wherever you are, and some of it is more targeted. So in fact, right now, I'm talking about, we have a brand new funding opportunity. We just released this last week. It's called Capacity Building Pre-Planning Assistance for Communities who are working towards the development of active transportation plans. And basically, we released the funding opportunity last week. We're going to be doing an informational webinar next week. People can ask questions about it, coming into July. And then by the end of July, we would want to see applications from municipalities wanting assistance in getting ready to apply next year for active transportation plans. The basic idea of this is that our active transportation planning grants are somewhat involved. We do ask that you assemble a fair amount of material in order to apply. You have to be working with your municipality. You need to be in touch with different state agencies in your region. You need to be building connections to people in public health, people in community organizations like schools, nonprofits, recreation and parks, things like that. And you need to be able to pull all this together and give it to us and say, this is why we want to do an active transportation plan for our community. And we've found that not every community can manage that. So this current funding round is directed just to the people in those Department of Environmental Protection EJ areas for Allegheny County purposes, or in those target counties. And it's to help people over this winter, basically from September to March, get ready to be able to apply next year. We will walk people through. And the ways that you yourself in public health could be assisting with this is you could be educating your community about the transportation and health connection and encouraging them to apply. You can, if they do get awarded, you can take part in, there would be tours in the community, site visits by either people with the PennDOT Local Technical Assistance Program or from WalkWorks. And there would be events to sort of raise awareness about the potential and need for active transportation improvements. And then you could also encourage your communities to apply for the active transportation funding round, which would be happening next spring. So our targeted technical assistance takes lots of forms. And again, this is available to anyone, anywhere in the state. We welcome, people who are just interested, want to keep up with what's going on. We do a newsletter twice a month. We provide information templates for different processes. Whether you're sending out an RFP to get an active transportation plan done, or you're working on an event and you need sort of information for volunteers, we can help with things like that. We just have a wealth of material available. Last year, we did a series of programs about safe routes to school. We did webinars, a series of 3 webinars about safe routes to school. We're working right now with the National Safe Routes Partnership on a Safe Routes to Parks program here in Pennsylvania. We also did an active transportation summit, statewide summit last year. This year, we're promoting other organization summits, but we're planning on doing an active transportation summit again in 2024. So, lots of opportunities to learn from others and, sort of find out what's going on. I recommend for your purposes, ways that you can support active transportation is by signing up for our newsletter, uh, telling people about the upcoming webinar about the capacity building grant opportunity coming up next week. There's also a statewide pedestrian and pedal cycle advisory committee. Actually, it meets quarterly and it is meeting this afternoon at 1 p.m. And actually, thanks to COVID, it now is a hybrid meeting, so it's more feasible for people to meet while it's actually happening in Harrisburg. I will be joining myself remotely. And then just in general, I recommend that people participate in active transportation planning, promotion, and projects in your area. And you can check out the WalkWorks website to learn more and find more resources and things like that. This is my contact information, and Tori will be able to share all of this with all of you all.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam. I do know there are a handful of municipalities that are on the call, so I don't know if this is just a good time if they have any questions to ask them now about anything that really was discussed. So I will open up the floor to any questions.
And again, you don't have to be a municipality in order to promote this, right? You have to be a municipality to apply, but you can, in many other roles, you can recommend that your municipality work on this or find out whether they're thinking about this. Just learn more about it.
Yeah, and thanks for the clarification, because that's what we do a lot too. We try to promote them and the communities to look into them. So
I'm curious, obviously in the Allegheny County area, there are lots of trails, right? Is there anyone here who is thinking about how to connect a community better to a trail? Like we might have a trail, even the gap, the Great Allegheny Passage is often great for people going along it, but not as good for people getting to it from within a community. Is anyone in that category, either with the gap or another local trail? Or not?
I think it's a lot of absorbing the information because it's a lot, but in a good way. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can even type it in the chat and we can answer it that way. Sam did share your slide. You shared your slides. Do you mind if I share them with the group as well?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's fine.
Perfect.
I'll actually send you the updated version.
Okay, that works great. Yeah. And this is do you want to answer, Sam? Go ahead.
Sure. So it says, and Laura, it says you do work on trails. This recording I think Tori will be available.
Yep, it'll be available.
Yeah, and certainly I'm glad to, communicate with other, I don't have to come and give a presentation. I can also just have conversations. I'm glad to have a meeting either directly with a person yourself in your, talking about your community and what the possibilities would be. Because often it is a little bit bewildering. It's like, I don't even know who does planning, right? Like who is in charge of the streets? And even that can be confusing for people who do know, to be honest, because there's a lot of jurisdictional changes between local streets and state roads. And why is it a state road? It's just an avenue through my community, so we do need to learn more about that in order to interface with this, but you don't have to be an expert. And I'm glad to, have that kind of conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura, for the question. And thanks, Sam, for answering it. Anyone else?
I do know that this is a little overwhelming. So I also welcome feedback like, I have no idea what you're talking about, or, like it was just too confusing or too much. let's see. So it says the mustard colored highlights of your target areas were helpful. And what there is a online map. And so when we share that, the link will take you to the actual, both the one that combines the span and the Department of Environmental Protection and EJ areas, but you can also just look up DEP environmental justice areas, and that is an online GIS map that you can zoom in on, change the background on. I will say that like there's not a background that shows the municipal boundaries, which I find to be very much irritating. Because I wind up having to look up the municipal boundaries and then overlay them to see what, how much of a community is covered. You don't have to be fully in an EJ area either to qualify. The EJ maps, if you zoom in on them, are both sort of what they have currently designated as an environmental justice area according to their current criteria. And then there's also sort of a pink buffer zone, a half-mile buffer around that. If, for example, your community were only in the buffer zone and next to a community that was an EJ area, you might or you might not uh, be eligible. The reason being, if there's a lot of connections across that boundary, and you can argue that your parks, your schools are serving people also in the EJ area, you may be able to qualify on that basis. In general, though, typically you need to have populated EJ area within your municipality in order to qualify.
And you can type in your zip code and it like brings up the map and you can zoom in that way to answer your question too, Amy. Cool. So if there's no other questions, I will make a follow-up email with all the information Sam shared, and then the recording will be available on our website. I'll send out the recording too once it's uploaded in the email, so you can share that out.
Great.
Yeah, thank you again, Sam, for a great presentation. I think it was really helpful to the group, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Sure. Glad to talk to you all.
Yeah, have a good day, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.